The air in the lawyer's office was thick enough to cut with a knife. Across the polished mahogany table, my neighbor from hell, Eleanor Vance, was smiling like a Cheshire cat. She was a woman who had made my life a living nightmare for 6 solid months over a strip of gravel driveway. She thought she had me cornered. She thought her lawyer's threatening letters and constant harassment had finally broken me. She was pointing at a map, her finger jabbing at a red line she'd drawn herself, her voice dripping with venomous victory. "As you can see," she declared, her gaze flicking between me and my landlord, a nervous man named Mr. Gable. "The driveway is clearly part of my property's historical easement. Mr. Peterson here," she said my name like it was something she'd scraped off her shoe, "has been trespassing. We are prepared to sue not only for damages, but for the installation of a permanent barrier." Her lawyer, a slick man with too much gel in his hair, nodded sagely. My client's claim is ironclad. I just sat there, silent, my hands resting on a thick 3-ring binder in front of me. Eleanor thought this meeting was about her victory. She thought it was about a few feet of gravel. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly imagine, was that the binder in front of me contained a 100-year-old secret. A secret I'd unearthed from the dusty city archives that wasn't just going to win me a parking spot. Oh no, it was going to cost her the very land her prize-winning rose garden was planted on. It was going to cost her a piece of her house. And it was going to prove, once and for all, that she wasn't just a nightmare neighbor, she was a fraud. She just didn't know it yet. And I was going to enjoy every second of the revelation. It all started 6 months ago, when I moved into the left side of a charming old duplex on what I thought was the quietest street in the city. I'm a civil engineer, specializing in land surveying and urban planning. My life is about precision maps and property lines. I find comfort in clear boundaries and logical rules. This duplex was perfect. It had character, a small yard for my dog, and a long, shared-looking driveway that ran between my building and the identical duplex next door. The rent was reasonable, and my landlord, Mr. Gable, seemed like a decent, hands-off kind of guy. For the first 2 weeks, it was paradise. Then I met Eleanor Vance. She owned the duplex next to mine. She didn't live in it. She'd inherited it from her parents and rented out both sides. But she might as well have lived there because she was there every single day. Eleanor was in her late 60s, with a helmet of perfectly coiffed silver hair and a perpetual expression that suggested she'd just smelled something foul. She treated the entire block like her personal fiefdom, but her laser focus, I would soon learn, was on the property line between our 2 duplexes. The first sign of trouble was a note. I came out to my car one morning to find a piece of expensive cream-colored stationery tucked under my windshield wiper. It was written in an elegant, looping cursive that was somehow both beautiful and menacing. It read, "A polite reminder. The left 2/3 of this driveway are for the exclusive use of my tenants. Your vehicle is currently infringing upon this space by approximately 4 inches. Please be more considerate of the established boundaries in the future. Cordially, Eleanor Vance, property owner. 4 inches. I literally got out a tape measure. She was right. My tire was about 4 inches over an imaginary line. I was impressed by her precision and annoyed by her pettiness. I made a mental note to park more carefully, shrugged it off, and went to work. I figured that was the end of it. A quirky, territorial neighbor. No big deal. Oh, how wrong I was. The next day, I parked dead center in my half of the driveway. I got out, looked at it from every angle, and felt satisfied. There was at least 2 feet of clearance on either side of the imaginary line. The following morning, there was another note. Your vehicle, while technically on your side, is casting a shadow on my property. This is visually disruptive to the neighborhood's aesthetic. Please park closer to your building. This is your second notice, casting a shadow. I read the note 3 times, sure I was misunderstanding it. I looked at the sun. I looked at my car's shadow. It was, in fact, touching her side of the driveway. This woman was complaining about a shadow. I crumpled up the note and tossed it. This was a level of absurdity I wasn't willing to engage with. That was my mistake. My refusal to engage was, to Eleanor, a declaration of war. The next phase of her campaign involved orange traffic cones. One morning, I came out to find a neat line of bright orange cones placed exactly down the middle of the driveway, creating a little fence. It made pulling out of the narrow space incredibly difficult. I tried to talk to her about it. I saw her standing on her porch, watching me, a smug little smile on her face. "Excuse me, Ms. Vance?" I called over, trying to keep my tone friendly. "I'm your new neighbor, Alex. I was wondering if we could talk about these cones. They make it a bit hard to maneuver." She looked me up and down, her eyes full of disdain. "The cones are there to delineate the property line, which you seem incapable of respecting," she said, her voice crisp and cold. "If you are a competent driver, you should have no issue." "I'm a very competent driver," I said, my patience starting to fray. "But this is a bit much, don't you think? We're neighbors. Surely we can share a driveway without a cone wall between us." "We are not sharing anything," she snapped. "You are a temporary renter. I am a permanent owner. My family has owned this property for 70 years. We have standards. The driveway boundary is one of them. Respect it, or there will be consequences." She then turned on her heel and marched back into her tenant's side of the duplex, as if she lived there. I stood there, stunned. It was clear that reasoning with this woman was impossible. So I decided to just live with the cones. I'd be extra careful. I wouldn't give her any ammunition. But Eleanor didn't need ammunition. She had a stockpile of it in her own twisted mind. The cones were just the beginning. Her campaign of terror escalated slowly, methodically. It started with phone calls to my landlord, Mr. Gable. He called me one evening sounding flustered. Alex? It's David Gable. Listen, I got a call from Eleanor Vance next door. She said you were having loud parties late at night. I was floored." "Parties?" "Mr. Gable, I'm an engineer. My idea of a wild night is staying up until 10:30 watching a documentary on bridge construction. I haven't had a single person over since I moved in." "Yeah, that's what I thought," he said, sighing. "Look, she's difficult. Just try to keep the noise down, I guess." "There is no noise to keep down," I said, frustrated. "She's making it up." The calls continued. A week later, Mr. Gable called about a strong, unpleasant odor coming from my apartment. I'd been cooking garlic bread. Another call was about my dog, Buster, a quiet 12-year-old golden retriever, who she claimed was barking incessantly at all hours. Buster barely had the energy to get off his dog bed. Let alone bark incessantly, I realized I needed to protect myself. I installed a security camera on my porch, a small, discreet one that covered my door and my side of the driveway. It had audio and video recording. The very next time she called Mr. Gable to complain about Buster's rabid howling, I was ready. I calmly emailed my landlord the 24 hours of footage from my porch, which showed Buster sleeping peacefully and not making a single sound. Mr. Gable called me back, apologetic. "Okay, I see what you mean. She's definitely exaggerating. I'm sorry you have to deal with this, Alex. I'll try to handle her." But his attempts to handle her were laughably ineffective. Eleanor was a force of nature, and Mr. Gable was more like a gentle breeze. Her complaints were so frequent and so bizarre that he started just forwarding me her emails with a note that said FYI. One email claimed I was operating a commercial vehicle repair business out of the driveway because I'd changed my own windshield wipers. Another accused me of attracting vermin because my trash can was, and I quote, "positioned at an angle that is aesthetically displeasing and likely tempting to local raccoons." It was maddening. It felt like I was being pecked to death by a deranged chicken. My home, my place of peace, had become a source of constant low-grade stress. Every time I stepped outside, I felt her eyes on me from a window. Every time I got in my car, I braced myself for a new note, a new cone, a new imagined infraction. The turning point, the moment this went from absurd annoyance to outright war, came when my sister came to visit. She parked behind my car on my side of the driveway, totally out of the way. We were inside having coffee for maybe 20 minutes when we heard a loud, angry voice from outside. We went to the door and saw Eleanor standing in the driveway, yelling at my sister's car as if it were a person. "This is a private residential property, not a public parking lot," she shrieked. My sister, a sweet, non-confrontational person, looked horrified. I stepped outside. "Ms. Vance, this is my sister. She's a guest. She's parked on my side and isn't blocking anyone." Eleanor spun around to face me, her face a mask of fury. "Guests are a privilege, not a right. Her vehicle is lowering the property value with its mere presence. It's not the right color for this neighborhood. Tell her to leave immediately." I'm not going to tell my sister to leave, I said, my voice dangerously calm. You are harassing my guest and you need to go back to your property. Now. My property extends to the maintenance of this community's standards. She screeched. You renters are all the same. You have no respect. No investment! You are a blight. That was it. The dam of my patience, which had been cracking for months, finally burst. A blight? A blight? I pay my rent on time, I'm quiet, I keep to myself. The only blight on this street is you, you miserable entitled old bat. You've been harassing me since the day I moved in over shadows and garbage cans. It's pathological. Now get off this property before I call the police for trespassing. The shock on her face was magnificent. No one had ever spoken to her like that. She stammered, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. For a second, I thought I'd won. But then, a slow, malicious smile spread across her face. Oh, you'll be hearing from my lawyer, she hissed, and then she walked away. I knew this was a turning point. She wasn't going to let this go. And I, for the first time, decided I wasn't going to just defend anymore. I was going to fight back. And as a surveyor, I had a very particular set of skills. Skills that were perfect for ending a dispute about property lines, once and for all. A week later, just as she'd promised, the letter arrived. It was from a law firm, Vance, Hargrove & Finch. I noted with some amusement that her own last name was in the firm's title. It was a formal cease and desist, full of intimidating legal jargon. It accused me of repeated and flagrant trespassing, verbal assault, and creating a hostile environment. It demanded that I cease parking in the driveway altogether and issue a formal written apology to Ms. Vance, or they would pursue legal action to have me evicted. It was a bluff, and a sloppy one at that, full of unenforceable threats, but it was designed to scare a typical renter. The letter was the final piece of the puzzle. She wasn't just a cranky neighbor. She was a bully who used money and bogus legal threats to get her way. I looked at the letter, then at the driveway, and then at her duplex. A thought started to form in my mind. A wild, beautiful, audacious idea. She was obsessed with this property line. She had built her entire miserable existence around defending this imaginary boundary. What if the boundary wasn't where she thought it was? In older parts of the city, property lines are notoriously weird. They were drawn up a century ago, sometimes using landmarks that no longer exist, like the old oak tree or Miller's Creek. Modern surveys often find discrepancies. Usually, they're minor, a few inches here or there, and neighbors just sort of live with it under a principle called adverse possession or mutual agreement. But Eleanor and I had no mutual agreement. We had a state of war. That weekend, I didn't go out. I didn't see friends. I went to work. My first stop was the city's Hall of Records. It's a dusty old place, full of giant leather-bound books and microfilm readers that smell of ozone and decaying paper. But to a surveyor, it's a treasure trove. I started with the most recent plats for our block. They showed the driveway as pretty much split down the middle, just as everyone assumed. But these were modern maps based on previous surveys. To find the truth, you have to go back to the beginning. I spent hours scrolling through microfilm, my eyes burning. I went back 50 years, then 70. And then I found it. The original plat map for our subdivision, drawn in 1923. My heart started pounding. The handwriting was ornate, the ink faded, but the lines were clear, and they told a very, very different story. Back in 1923, our 2 duplexes were part of a single large estate. When the owner died, he split the property between his 2 children. The property line wasn't a straight line down the middle of the driveway. It was a jagged, bizarre line that jogged sharply to the right. According to the original, legally binding survey from 1923, the entire driveway, every single inch of it, belonged to my duplex. I felt a jolt of pure adrenaline. This was it. This was the silver bullet. I could take this to Mr. Gable, and he could legally bar her from ever setting foot on the driveway again. It would be a total victory, but I didn't stop. I was a professional, and my curiosity was piqued. If the line was wrong there, where else might it be wrong? I kept digging. I cross-referenced the 1923 plat with subsequent deeds and tax assessments. I found the original surveyor's notes, which mentioned iron pin markers set at the corners of the property. People often remove these over the years, but sometimes they survive. The next Saturday, I rented a professional-grade metal detector. I felt a little silly sweeping it over the lawn and garden beds around the two properties, but I was on a mission. I got a faint beep near the back corner of the properties. I dug down carefully with a trowel. About 6 inches below the manicured lawn, my trowel hit something hard. I brushed away the dirt. It was a rusted but still solid iron pin, the original 1923 survey marker. My breath caught in my throat. I had found the anchor point, the legally recognized corner of the property. Now, I could measure everything from this point with millimeter accuracy. I spent the rest of the day taking meticulous measurements, using professional laser equipment I borrowed from my office. I triple-checked everything. I drew up a new, highly detailed survey map of the two properties, overlaying the original 1923 lines with the current structures. And that's when my incredible discovery turned into a bombshell. The driveway was just the appetizer. The real story was at the back of the property. The original line didn't just give my property the driveway. It jogged so far over that a huge, triangular slice of what Eleanor considered her backyard was, in fact, part of Mr. Gable's property. This slice of land wasn't just empty grass. It contained two things. First, Eleanor's magnificent prize-winning rose garden, a source of immense neighborhood pride and the subject of several glowing articles in the local paper. She pampered those roses like they were her children. The second thing on that slice of land was even more significant. It was the corner of her duplex's foundation, a concrete slab about 3 feet by 5 feet, which supported the back corner of her building, including the kitchen of one of her tenants, was not on her land. For nearly a century, her building had been illegally encroaching on my landlord's property. I sat back on the grass, looking at my data, a slow, wicked grin spreading across my face. This was beyond anything I could have imagined. This wasn't just a dispute anymore. This was leverage. This was checkmate. Eleanor Vance had built her life around the sanctity of her property line. And I had just discovered that her entire life was built on a lie. She hadn't just been a bully. She'd been a trespasser on a grand scale for years, and she had absolutely no idea. I spent the next week compiling my findings into a professional, undeniable report. I included copies of the 1923 plat map, photos of the iron survey marker, my certified measurements, and the new map I'd drawn up. It was a work of art, a masterpiece of petty professional revenge. I put it all into a thick 3-ring binder. The first person I showed it to was my landlord, Mr. Gable. We met at a coffee shop. I laid the maps out on the table. He listened intently, his eyes getting wider and wider as I explained my findings. When I got to the part about the corner of her building being on his land, he choked on his coffee. "Are you serious?" he whispered, staring at the map. "Her building is on my land?" "About 15 square feet of it, yes," I said calmly. "And her entire award-winning rose garden. And, of course, the whole driveway. Mr. Gable looked like he'd just won the lottery. He was a quiet man who had been bullied by Eleanor for years. I could see a newfound steel entering his eyes. What does this mean legally?" he asked. "It means you have a few options," I explained, leaning forward. "You could force her to sell you the duplex at a steep discount. You could sue her for decades of illegal encroachment and land use. Or, my personal favorite, you could require her to pay you a hefty monthly lease for the land her building is sitting on. If she refuses, you could, theoretically, get a court order to have the corner of her building removed from your property." The image of a construction crew taking a jackhammer to the corner of Eleanor's duplex hung in the air between us. Mr. Gable was silent for a full minute. Then he looked at me, a slow grin spreading across his face. "She called another meeting with her lawyer," he said. "She thinks she has us cornered over you parking in the driveway. She wants to intimidate us into making you move out." "I know," I said. "I got a copy of the letter." "When is the meeting?" "Tomorrow morning," he said. I tapped the thick binder. "Then tomorrow morning, we end this." And that's how we ended up in that stuffy lawyer's office, with Eleanor Vance gloating, completely unaware that she was a queen sitting on a throne of lies, about to be spectacularly dethroned. She had just finished her triumphant speech about my flagrant trespassing in the driveway. Her lawyer, Mr. Finch, leaned back in his chair looking smug. "So, as you can see, Mr. Gable, the situation is untenable. For the sake of neighborhood harmony, we expect you to terminate Mr. Peterson's lease. Failing that, we will file for damages and an injunction. Mr. Gable looked at me. I gave him a subtle nod. It was time. Well, Mr. Finch, Eleanor, Mr. Gable started, his voice surprisingly firm. We appreciate you laying out your perspective. However, we've done some research of our own that I think you'll find illuminating. Alex, if you would. I slid the heavy binder to the center of the table with a satisfying thud. Eleanor scoffed. What is that? Your diary of grievances? I assure you we are not interested. Not quite, I said, opening the binder to the first page, a crystal-clear copy of the 1923 plat map. Ms. Vance, you pride yourself on your family's long history on this property. I thought it was only right that we consult the original founding documents. This is the official plat map from 1923, the one that legally divided the properties. Please, take a look. Mr. Finch leaned forward, squinting. He was a family lawyer, likely a nephew or cousin of Eleanor's, and clearly out of his depth with property law. He looked at the map, then at the modern map Eleanor had brought, and frowned in confusion. I don't understand, he said. The lines are different. That's right, they are, I said cheerfully. And in property law, the original plat holds precedence. Now, if you'll direct your attention to the area of the driveway, I used a pen to trace the line. You'll see that according to the only map that matters in a court of law, the entire driveway, curb to curb, belongs to Mr. Gable's property. Eleanor's smile faltered. She snatched the map and held it close to her face. This is fake. This is absurd. It's a forgery. It's a certified copy from the Hall of Records, I said, pushing the notarized stamp towards her. Feel free to verify it yourself. The legal reality, Ms. Vance, is that for the past 70 years, your family and your tenants have been the ones trespassing. Every time you set foot on that driveway, you were on our property. Mr. Finch's face had gone pale. He was starting to realize the hole they were in. This is highly irregular. There may be grounds for an adverse possession claim. There might have been, I cut in, my voice sharp, if Ms. Vance had been a good neighbor. But an adverse possession claim requires the use to be, among other things, peaceable and non-hostile. I have 6 months of documented incessant hostility. Notes, fabricated complaints, harassment of my guests. I have time-stamped video footage. There isn't a judge in this state who would grant you a peaceable claim. In fact, her actions have legally voided any claim she might have had. The room was silent, except for Eleanor's ragged breathing. Her smug mask was gone, replaced by a dawning horror. She thought this was bad. She had no idea. I turned the page in the binder. But the driveway is actually the least of your problems, I said, my voice dropping for dramatic effect. Let's talk about the back of the property. I laid out my new survey map, the one with the bright red triangle of encroachment. I found the original 1923 survey marker, I explained. And based on its legally recognized position, I resurveyed the property lines. And it turns out there is a significant discrepancy. I pointed to the red triangle. This triangular section here, which measures approximately 350 square feet, is also part of Mr. Gable's property. Eleanor stared at the map. That's my rose garden, she whispered. My mother planted that garden. I'm afraid your mother planted it on someone else's land, I said coldly. Which is unfortunate. But what's even more unfortunate is what else is on that land. I tapped the corner of the drawing of her duplex. This back corner of your building, the foundation supporting your tenant's kitchen, it's here, on our land. That's when she finally broke. No! She shrieked, standing up so fast her chair screeched backwards. No, you're lying! This is a trick! You're trying to steal my family's home! Mr. Finch looked like he was going to be sick. He was frantically flipping through a law book on his phone, but he knew. He knew they were utterly, comprehensively ruined. Mr. Gable, no longer a nervous landlord, but a man in a position of absolute power, spoke up. His voice was calm and steady. It's no trick, Eleanor. It's a fact. A legal, verifiable fact. For decades, your building has been encroaching on my property. He leaned forward. So, here are your options. Option A, you sell me your duplex. Given the enormous legal costs you're facing and the cost of moving a building, I'm prepared to offer you 30% of its market value. Take it or leave it. Eleanor looked like he had slapped her. Option B, he continued. You concede ownership of the encroaching portion of the building to me. Of course, that would make me a part owner of your property, with all the rights that entails. I could move into your tenant's kitchen if I wanted to. And option C is my personal favorite, he said, a cold smile touching his lips. You can pay me. You will pay retroactive rent for the use of my land for the past 20 years, which my lawyer has calculated at a rather substantial sum. Then you will pay a monthly lease for the land moving forward, a very, very expensive lease. And of course, you will cede all control of the driveway and the rose garden, effective immediately. We will be installing a fence, he sat back. You have 24 hours to decide. If we don't hear from your lawyer with your choice, we will be filing a lawsuit that will not only force the sale of the property, but will also include damages for harassment and legal fees. Your call. Eleanor Vance just stood there, her face the color of ash, her entire world of self-righteous certainty demolished by a 100-year-old map and a renter she had pushed too far. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She just stared at the map, at the red triangle that represented the complete and utter destruction of her little empire. She had lost. She had lost everything, all because she couldn't stand the thought of my car casting a shadow on her. Precious gravel. She eventually chose option C. Her lawyer knew it was the only way to avoid a financially ruinous lawsuit that she would absolutely lose. The first check she wrote to Mr. Gable was for tens of thousands of dollars in back rent for the land. The monthly lease she now pays for the corner of her own building is more than the mortgage. The day the fence company came was beautiful. They erected a tall, handsome privacy fence exactly on the new, correct property line. It runs straight down the edge of the driveway, giving us full control, and then cuts sharply across the back, bisecting her precious rose garden. Half the roses are on our side now. I've been taking care of them. They seem to be doing much better without her. Mr. Gable was so thrilled he gave me a 50% rent reduction for the remainder of my lease and a permanent, designated parking spot right next to my door. I don't see Eleanor anymore. They say she still owns the property, but she never comes by. The tyrannical reign of the Queen is over. The street is quiet, peaceful. My new neighbors, her tenants, are lovely people who were also terrified of her. We had a barbecue last weekend to celebrate the new fence. Sometimes, when I'm pulling into my driveway, I think about the first note she left me. Be more considerate of the established boundaries. It turns out I was the only one who actually knew where those boundaries were. And there's a deep, satisfying irony in the fact that a woman so obsessed with a few inches of property ended up losing a piece of her own foundation. She picked a fight with the one person she never should have, a man who gets paid to know exactly where the line is drawn. What's the pettiest thing a neighbor has ever done to you? Let me know your story in the comments below. And if you enjoyed seeing this Landlord Karen get a lesson in property law, make sure you subscribe to Keys and Chaos and ring that notification bell. You won't want to miss the next story of when entitlement gets evicted.